there is no shortcut to knowledge. Either you got it or you don't have it. There's no shortcut. It's like in the theater. There's no shortcut in the theater. No. Either you know how to do it or you don't.
We more or less started this conversation during the setup of this equipment, and what you show, Mr. King, in the work that you have done for now 48 years in founding and managing director of New Federal Theater is the power of live theater and the importance of black theater. For 48 years you have been in charge of New Federal Theater. So I wanted to just ask, going from each aspect of specifically a theater experience, which is very different from the film watching experience, which is very different from the television watching experience. To ask you, what are those aspects that you see? Because apparently what you see is influential. Apparently what you see has merit. Because of your vision, the whole nation of the United States and the world is able to see and experience the talent of artists like Denzel Washington. So my first question to you is basically, could you talk about what was compelling about the performance, live theater performance of not only male artists like Denzel Washington, but also female artists and female works like Ntozake Shange?
Well, what I saw in growing up and coming out of high school and entering Wayne State University, what I saw was a lack of. It did not exist. Okay. Then at some point, maybe 57 or 58, I'm searching, I'm looking, I'm trying to find images of myself, and I found them in Sidney Poitier in a film called The Defiant Ones. And while I'm tracing the trajectory of Sidney Poitier, it was theater, the American Negro Theater. He graduated from there, but when he arrived in New York at 17, he couldn't speak English. He was West Indian. He came from Cat Island, Jamaica, and he came to New York because any place was better to fulfill his dream, even though it wasn't set. The dream wasn't set, it was searching. And he walked into the American Negro Theater, and he met these people, and these people taught him how to speak, and he listened, and eventually he could speak English well. Okay. Then as I was studying him, it taught me a great deal about the American Negro Theater and the three people who ran it, Fred O'Neill, Abe Hill, and Osceola Archer. So I said, wow, let me just see about them. And in the library, I studied them, and then the next person was Sammy Davis and Porgy and Bess. I don't think you will ever see a performance like that anywhere. It's one of the great performances on film, and how he was denied access, and he was a song and dance man. Sidney Poitier became the image I wanted to follow. So at 17, he couldn't read and speak English. At 24, he was nominated for Academy Award. That's what I wanted to do. And he was a black man, black, and handsome. And I couldn't say, wait a minute, my blackness can't stop me. It didn't stop him, My color didn't stop. Okay, so I jumped on that. Then the local library introduced me to books, and these books were about what and who ran the American theater. And very few were African Americans. The Negro in American theater was probably the most recognized by Edith Isaac. And then there was the, I think it was called Arena. Hallie Flanagan wrote a book called Arena about the founding of the Federal Theater Project. That was before I came to New York now. Okay, so I set out to replicate that in Detroit. And we built this theater called Concept East, about 11 of us, African Americans, whites, and out of the university there, Wayne University, because we couldn't get no roles there. And so one of those plays was highly, highly visible by Reverend Malcolm Boyd, Episcopal priest. And we put on the play. It was packed in Detroit. And I said, wow, this is amazing. I made this happen. So my producer's hat came on. So I'm acting, producing, and directing, and we toured this all over the country, and coffee houses, and churches, and parish halls, and we gave the money to the Civil Rights Movement, and we toured the South. We became very, very popular because Reverend Malcolm Boyd was popular. Okay, and we ended up in New York at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, and we built that theater because I had built a theater in Detroit. We had built it. We knew how to take cans and all that and make our lights, and we knew how to tie cable. We knew all of that because we learned it in Detroit, and not at a university, because the university was basically racist. It was before the new integration of theater programs. We were just in something called radio and television, studying, wanting to be. And my training in theater and acting at Willow Way School of Theater had introduced me to all these how-to places. You can do this, how to do that. Okay, so that's sort of like what got me into New York in the mid-'60s. So.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. And from there, St. Mark's Playhouse, you set up the set that several productions birthed from that same place. One of them, which I'm sure was instructive to you about how to run a theater company, was where the Negro Ensemble company was, St. Mark's Playhouse.
No, that was down the street from where St. Mark's Playhouse was. St. Mark's Church in the Bowery.
Church in the Bowery.
It was a theater called Theater Genesis, and we played there for, about 3.5 months. And when the Boy and Study in Color, both by Reverend Malcolm Boyd, closed, we were ready to come in and do another play.
Yes.
But the minister there said, no, we're going to bring in other writers. And one of the writers they brought in was the late Sam Shepard.
Okay.
And he became the darling of the off-Broadway theater scene. Other was Murray Mendick. These writers were a part of the growing artistic community in the village.
And what did you learn from them watching? I assume you watched their work.
We were a little bit more advanced than them.
Okay.
But we were more into blackness. They were more into telling their story.
Yes.
They weren't interested in telling our story, and that was the mid-'60s. And at that time, Amiri Baraka, then known as Leroy Jones, were had a play on called Dutchman.
Yes.
Unbelievably popular. And we hooked into him, and he hooked into us, and we all liked each other, Yes. And I think it was about a year later, something called the Black Arts Movement, about the evolution of, I know you heard a great deal about the Black Arts Movement.
Yes.
And the Black Arts Movement was about self-sufficiency, self-empowerment, tying into Black Power, tying into different aspects of the civil rights movement. So our work had to be relevant, had to be unique and different. Okay, so I'm here in New York, and I'm hanging with artists I respected, I knew. You know, if you read anything before you got here, you know, you knew you could go down the street and see plays by Edward Albee, Frank Gaglione, other.
Eugene O'Neill.
No.
This Eugene O'Neill.
This was way after he had died, way in the late 40s. Oh, okay. But these were the new writers. Ellen Stewart was producing.
So founded La Mama.
Yeah. That was what was going on at that time. And so what began to happen is the unrest in communities across America. This unrest manifested itself in the form of riots and revolution. In Watts, it was a revolution. In New York, it was a riot. In Detroit, a riot. It's all in the 60s now. In Newark, it was riot. These riots, decimated our cities. The assassination of Kennedy, assassination of, in 63, of John Kennedy, 68, Robert Kennedy, 68, Dr. King. And, you know, it was just, it was like unbelievably sad what was going on in America. And we were trying to create art. We just couldn't create art and not have it for some reason. You just can't talk and don't talk about nothing.
Right.
You know?
Your work was definitely doing that. I was interested in the first piece that I believe the PBS American Playhouse produced, which was J.E. Franklin's, correct me if I'm wrong, Black Girl.
No,
that was Minnie Gentry.
Yeah, that was produced by me in 72, 73, off Broadway. Ozzie Davis made a movie out of it for ABC television. The movie was just great. And I was in with that crowd, you know. But J.E. Franklin is certainly a major American playwright. That play sort of like manifested itself and proved that to the world, that wow, this guy, he's staying with his mission. We had started New Federal in 1970, and all it was about was integrating minorities and women into the mainstream of American theater. Wow, is it that many minorities and women who are not working? That's what white people would say. Yes. And we proved that, you know. So if we are talking about black theater, okay, I produced a black quartet at Chelsea Theater Center. I produced, that was plays, one act plays by Bullins, Baraka, Ron Milner, Ben Caldwell. The next year, because I was traveling so much, I brought in Gil Moses. We produced Slave Ship, which is phenomenal. It went all over the world, directed by Gilbert Moses.
Written by Mary Baraka?
Written by Mary Baraka. So what was happening beyond any kind of dreams, ideals I could imagine, the world was sort of like opening up in the midst of this chaos for these theaters and dance companies, Negro Ensemble, New Lafayette, National Black Theater, then New Federal Theater.
You have a documentary that features all of them called Black Theater.
Yes.
That came out in 1978, which I had the opportunity to see, and all those people that you mentioned are in that.
Yes.
You also have, I said to you during the setup, footage, video of Joseph Papp, who I never saw before, who co-produced You mentioned production credits with you. The incredible influential play for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough.
Yes.
Can you talk about that co-production?
Okay. Well, in one of the things about co-producing and producing and dealing with white artists, white producers, white entrepreneurs is knowing their history. If you don't know one's history, they aren't going to produce anything with you. Joseph Papp came out of the Los Angeles Actors Theater, which is filled with the radical left. And the radical left was a short jump from communism. And they were sort of like looked down on, if you will. But they worked with African Americans. And a lot of African Americans did not want to work with nationalists. And I was a nationalist, Baraka was a nationalist, Ed Bullins was a nationalist. We were all nationalists, you know? And but he was also a musician. And so the conversations that we would have would center around his music.
Because you talk a lot about Charlie Parker in your own
yes, yes.
And his influence.
And we co-produced first a play out of the Frank Severo workshop called Mondongo. Then we co-produced The Taking of Miss Janey by Ed Bullins. And we co-produced for Colored Girls, a phenomenal success. A 9-year success. And at the same time, in the same year, we produced What the Wine Cellars Buy by Ron Milner, where if you produce a certain kind of writing, it will relate to African Americans in the inner cities. And what we sort of like found, there's no difference in the inner city of Harlem, of Cleveland, Black Bottom in Detroit, South Side Chicago, if it is all relatable, if the play is true. So we could go in these cities and run 2 or 3 months. Now also what we learned is, since it had never been done before, there were this belief from theater owners that, the theater goers are not going to the theater in the summertime. They're going on vacation. They're going to the islands. They're going to Florida. So I could rent a theater for $10,000 a week back in those days, okay? And so What the Wine Cellars Buy took advantage of that. And we rented these theaters, and we would go in and we would do $200,000 or $300,000 a week in box office, okay? But what you also learn is you can't go back next year and rent, because they say, wait a minute, you made a lot of money, so we want 25% of the gross and $25,000 a week. So that just cut that out, okay? And I'll tell you about how Tyler Perry took advantage of that. You know, there is no shortcut to knowledge. Either you got it or you don't have it. There's no shortcut. It's like in the theater. There's no shortcut in the theater. No. Either you know how to do it or you don't. That's right. And if you know how to do it, you almost hear it. You know, you hear it. It don't sound right. Like I was telling you, to rent the theater, okay, I can get it for $10,000 a week. I know my cost is going to be, we're paying the actors and everything, maybe $150,000 a week. I'm grossing $200,000 a week. Money can go back in the theater. When it's not that, it's something wrong. And, okay, so do you admire Tyler Perry or you watch what's going down? So eventually you say, oh, he's going to do Medea. He's going to pay himself $75,000 a week. There's nothing else to pay the other actors in the play, the stage manager, the travel, the hotel. So they must be suffering. So I better pass on that. You know what I mean? Okay, now he can become unbelievably wealthy. He gets hip, and he said, wait a minute, I can rent a church, and it can gross $600,000. I can pay everybody a little bit more. Still pay myself 75, but now I got another 100 to pay everybody else. And his wealth and moral values really shows him how to capitalize on it, you know, and at the same time, rent a church and pay them rather than a theater owner. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely, just renting a church.
Yeah, you know, and then he does the same thing in the movies. He can do Medea, he can, now I can get an actor, I pay myself whatever, $1 million, $2 million. I can pay Janet Jackson $300,000 or $400,000. I can pay, you know, Lamar Rucker more, and I got a big budget. Now I'm up in the millions. So he sort of like capitalized on what we could not, because the times were changing. So that's what I always say about how it evolves, you know.
The storyline that you talked about just now with the storyline of Rico, and saying at the end, the reason the audience loves him at the end is because he makes a decision not to be a pimp.
Yes.
That's how I felt watching a New Federal Theater production of Leslie Lee's play, Sundown, Names and Night Gone Things, which I mentioned to you in 2008. There's a character in that play, and you called the actor's name before, Stephen Williams.
Yes.
Plays a character by the name of Cairo.
Yeah.
And similar to Rico, Cairo is witnessing in the story of that play that you produced, Cairo is witnessing these men, his co-workers, basically exploit the woman that they're selling insurance to. He's an insurance salesman. But he discovers that, you know, you can get the opportunity to sleep with them and give them the promise of lower insurance rates if these women will sleep with you. Mm-hmm. So could you just talk about, you know, just that storyline, and how I find it interesting that you say that storyline to me of what the wine cellars buy, and it was that story that made me love Leslie Lee, that made me love the way you, Mr. King, produced theater with that 2008 production of Sundown, Names and Night Gone Things, that made me start to take classes with the playwright Leslie Lee. So could you talk about those storylines that, as we both know, are fundamentally different from the work we see of Perry, but which speaks to that theater impulse, that theater, that experience you can only get in the theater, where you root for the underdog?
Well, what happens is you root for that in the plays by Shelley Garrett, Mike Matthews. These plays have, they're God-given, they're God-sent plays. At the end, we're religious, and someone comes in and sort of like Dux Machina.
Deus Machina?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Deus ex machina.
Yeah, and they are from the church, and the church saves them. They might be an angel, they might be getting the light, they might be getting it from Medea, they might be getting it from the setup of the play. But what we know is they are aimed at African Americans, because that's what we are. We are spiritual people, okay? And whether it is Leslie Lee, Ron Milner, any of these plays, we look for this goodness at the end. We cannot let we cannot let the hustler, the pimp, win at the end. Either the cops will get him, and we applaud, we shout, and for colored girls, after all of the hell these women go through, they come to a realization. In that realization, they say, I found God in myself, and she was wonderful, okay? And so they come together, they hug, and the applaud, and the audience really, it's just amazing to see women in the theater, women on stage hugging and crying, because it is something the play says, this is just not a play. These incidents tells me I found God in myself. I found God in myself, and she was wonderful. So it's two discoveries, okay? So now, in that, most great African American plays will find different ways of telling that story, okay? I grew up in a household of women. You will always see some sort of discovery of these women in my plays, okay? I grew up in a household without a father. In my plays, you will always see that search for a father, okay? And what you find is it's always kind of prevalent, always kind of present. And then you say, wait a minute, that's me. You know,
The search.
Yeah, search. You know, and I call it a search for brothers kindred. You know, and brothers kindred are those who are searching. You know,
that was a key point, and I think it was a kind of feeling that I got watching your plays, because I connected with Yolande. This desire to make a marriage work. I connected with Stephen Williams' character, Cairo, because I wanted his relationship with his girlfriend to succeed, and I wanted him not to feel bad in the workplace, even though Leslie's script tells us one of those things has to go, and it's his relationship, his personal relationship goes. And so I connect with him. He's more sympathetic, and that is the importance of the work you produce, Mr. King. The sympathy, something that Leslie Lee taught me, the writer for the stage has the most freedom, whereas the writer for film has minimal freedom, and he taught me in his class the writer for television has the least freedom. And what your work for the past 48 years has taught me, a thinker in this society, is to always cherish and honor the work of the stage writer. Okay. And it really played a big role in me developing my own artistic voice as a playwright. Why would I choose to do a play about A. Philip Randolph and his wife? Because I heard Leslie Lee tell me what inspired him to do Sundown, Names and Night Gone Things was studying.
I'm sorry. We don't have a lot of time. You gotta just hit him. He's dropping jewels. Like it's really like, how do we advance the art?
How do we?
If Tyler Perry isn't doing it for people, if that's not the best that we can get at, you know, why do so many people love him, and what can we do to challenge the status quo?
Okay. If you use Tyler Perry as an example, you got to go negative, and this is not about negative. You can't go positive with Tyler Perry. You can't go positive with someone who took a job from Ruby Dee, who took a job from Cicely Tyson, who takes jobs from older black women. You can't go positive on that. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's something else that uh, film needs and television needs that theater doesn't need. Okay, so Mike, it's something positive about you gathering your equipment and learning it and shooting. Okay, you can't say that about Spike Lee, because all he's going, you got to go negative, because he'll do she's got to have it, and half the people end up never getting paid. So you can't, unless you know all of that, you know, yes, white people do it, but we aren't talking about white people. The people, it's like, I'm not going to do no play if I don't have the money to pay them.
Period.
Period.
And that's why I admire you, because the fact that you're able to amass this for 48 years and develop a reputation of paying people is no small feat.
Right, right. So I want to know, it's something that we believe, and we believe is true, but it has no basis in reality. You know? Okay, so if you see Leslie Lee's Sundown Names and Night Going Things, okay, if you see a Freight, or if you see plays at New Federal, and you're talking to someone who you know has never seen a play at New Federal, they're just, okay, they'll say, oh, wow, Ron, you got a great reputation, but I'm just sorry I've never seen anything you've done. Okay, so that's that conversation is like, this has happened. A white person comes in and sees a play you've done, and they say, oh my God, you should be on Broadway. Oh my God, wow, this should be a movie. Then you know they are dealing with the reality. They're dealing with, if this was a white situation,
Definitely.
that's what would happen.
Definitely. My father told me that a long time ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I don't know how to say it, but there's that reality that is really a non-reality. You know what I mean?
Right.
Okay.
And it's the job of the artist to, what you've done is motivate me to constantly make the connection. What I was telling you about Tyson Chandler's wife, Kimberly Chandler, investing in Cicely Tyson's The Trip to Bountiful. Carmelo Anthony's wife, investing in Danai Gurira's Eclipsed. You know, you have shown me it is possible for what you wrote in your book, Black artists to constantly, the verb you used was constantly, talk to Black professionals about work, about supporting art. And that's really the obligation, similar, and I relate it back to, you know, Black abolitionists before the Civil War. The spread, word of mouth was how people knew it was a bad thing and slavery needed to end.
When you stay out of this community, if there's no Underground Railroad station in Detroit, you know not to go to Detroit. You know, if it's one in Cleveland, you go to Cleveland. So I'm so I don't know. You know, I don't know. I'm very careful about a truth and a reality and selling a project. I'm gonna give you an example. I got a friend who writes for Hollywood. Dear friend, if I mention him, you know him, but I'm not going to mention him.
Okay.
He goes into a production meeting with Hollywood execs, and he's going to pitch this idea. And he says, oh man, God damn it, I'm tired of seeing these movies that Black writers are writing where all the slaves are unhappy and damn it, there's some happy slaves. That film is going to be financed. But there's no truth in his conversation.
No truth.
Okay? Okay, is he going to make a comedy? Is he going to make a sad film? What is he going to do? He's going to get a decent advance for the first draft. He's going to get a decent amount of money for the second draft. And his wife or somebody's going to say, come on, man, that's stupid. They ain't going to never get the third part, but he's made $100,000 on development. You know what I mean? so
Different worldviews.
Yeah?
Different worldviews.
Different worldviews.
Yeah, and it's up to the artists to always push their own worldviews, independent filmmakers, independent theater producers like yourself supporting the theater. So to Mike's point, I mean, I would like to push theater. You know, that's really who I am. That's who I write for.
Uh-huh.
I watch television.
Mm-hmm.
I watch films on Hollywood, from Hollywood. But my MO is the theater, watching your work, having scenes that follow me from your plays when I go to bed at night to when I have breakfast in the morning. That make me want to read and make me want to teach. I told you that after seeing Knock Me a Kiss, I taught that in my English class.
Let me tell you something else, man. I don't know if you knew the late St. Clair Bourne.
Yes, he did that film on Paul Robeson.
Yes, he did a lot of documentaries.
Yeah.
A lot of docs. And he was my partner on The Long Night. He co-produced it with me. We would go in for development deals. And the young executive, usually white guy, start talking. And he starts talking about the plight of African Americans. And I see St. Clair, and I know we ain't gonna get that deal.
Because St. Clair is not budging.
Yeah, he's not budging. And basically he'll say, listen, you don't know what you're talking about. As a matter of fact, you're full of shit. And he said that to a couple of people in Hollywood. And that's the end of that project. They said, man, fuck it, this is stupid.
Haile Garima, who you mentioned in your book,
Yeah.
goes by that. He said in a very astounding way, a filmmaker has to promote not by commercial advertisements, but by word of mouth.
Yes.
And that's really also, I think, what made Knock Me a Kiss sell out for as long as it did. Black people talking to each other. You have to see this play. You have to see this play. It worked
Andre
for the Wiz.
DeShields' performance as W.B. Du Bois, amazing. I don't know if you saw The Most Dangerous Man in America.
No, I didn't get to see
Yeah,
that
that's
one.
another Du Bois piece. I've done 2 or 3 Du Bois pieces because that was my hero, and 3 or 4 Robeson pieces because that was my hero. But the journey from the 20s to the present is constant discovery of art. Okay, you cannot go through the 20th century without dealing with Burt Williams and George Walker.
Who's mentioned in Freight
Yeah.
by the main character.
And I produced Williams and Walker. So you can't go through the Harlem Renaissance period without dealing with Du Bois and his wife, and I produced that. You cannot go through the 30s and 40s without dealing with the American Negro Theater, and I produced Anna Lucasta. You cannot go through the 50s without dealing with writers like Lou Peterson, Take a Giant Step. You cannot, and Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, and I've produced that. So,
in that production that New Federal did, correct me if I'm wrong, one of my big actress mentors, Starletta DuPois,
and Glenn
Ruth.
Turman. And Glenn Turman. I mean,
Ernie
major
McClintock directed.
Yeah, huh?
Ernie McClintock
Yes,
directed.
Ernie McClintock directed. So, what I like about Real Black is it is a company that finds a way to get the information they get out there. Now, if it's through you, if it's through me, if it's through Mike, it doesn't matter. It's out there. So a young person can go and get it. I mean, it's been so many hits that saw that. I mean, that we did an interview earlier. There's so many hits, man. It's like they can't say I don't know.
That's right. Talk about your direct connection to Langston Hughes and the Harlem Renaissance.
My direct connection to Langston Hughes, he came into Detroit because those were the last years in the early 60s to give a poetry reading at the Poets House. And Ron Milner and I was assigned the task of driving him around the city. He was going to get the key to the city. And we got to know him. And he said, "Oh, you're an actor and you don't smoke or drink? Boy, that's good. When you come to New York, look me up." And that's all I needed. That was all I needed. So I adapted. I would write him and say, "Can I adapt the Weary Blues?" So I did an adaptation.
What year was that?
It had to be 62 or 3 that I started adapting it. I finished it when I got to New York. We presented it at Lincoln Center Museum and Library of the Performing Arts. He came to see it and gave me permission to adapt his simple stories into
Just to Be Simple.
Just to Be Simple into a theater piece. But more than that, it was visiting his home on 127th Street, sitting, talking to him late into the night, listening to his opinion on different poets, Georgia Douglas Johnson, writers like Jimmy Baldwin, and we would go and see in 1965 Jimmy Baldwin's Blues for Mr. Charlie. We would go to different plays, and his publishing me in Best Short Stories by Negro writers. It's sold forever. And the adaptation and production of his play, Weary Blues. And I was very involved in his funeral. Randy Weston, Lena Horne, myself, and Ron Milner. And just being close to him when he wanted to go and see a play, when he would compare Vinette Carroll's work, because she had directed his Prodigal Son with Dr. Gloria Van Scott, who's now on my board of directors. It was like he was one of the most admired writers and one of the friendliest people. And I wrote about it in one of my stories. I forgot the name of it. Langston's leaving never meant he was gone. Okay. And so it's a long, long relationship of writers who he knew, who he thought I should know. Okay. I was working in theater. He introduced me to Stella Holt. He introduced me to other writers and producers who were producing his work.
Undoubtedly, that had an impact on you on how to produce.
Well, being younger, you can't tell a young person anything because I thought I knew everything. So that's hard, you know.
Okay.
I had read everything, I knew everything, and what I didn't know, I knew where to find it. Okay. If I did not know Zora Neale Hurston, I would go to Langston because he had a first-hand knowledge of Zora Neale Hurston. You know, if I didn't know Wallace Thurman, I would go to Langston because he had a first-hand knowledge of Wallace Thurman. You understand? Yes. Okay. So it was a kind of search for the unknown, you could always find it. This was before Google. This was before you could only get it through word of mouth. Okay, if you did not know Richard Wright, he'll send you to Jimmy Baldwin, and Jimmy Baldwin will tell you about Langston Hughes and Richard Wright. And those days, as I told you, immediately after Langston died, they opened up Europe and France to me. Both of them had said, you got to go to France, you got to go to London, you got to go to these places. And they were told I didn't have to search. I could go there, and there would be the poet. He had told me about Harch Leroy Bibb. You go to this hotel, and you mention Langston Hughes or Jimmy Baldwin, and you don't have to search for a hotel room. You go to the Lutetia Hotel, and that was before it became a landmark. You know what I mean? It was like, those are the kind of things that people didn't have access to. Young black people didn't have access to those places. All the money, it was like.
And I'm thinking also about the Artist Network. You mentioned seeing plays from Hughes's recommendation by Baldwin. One of those plays was Blues for Mr. Charlie, and if my memory serves me correctly, Francis Foster, who directed, I think, one of a new Federal Theater production, was either acting or directing Blues for Mr. Charlie. I think she directed Blues for Mr. Charlie at some time.
She might have, but she directed Pearl Clegg's play, Hospice.
New NFT production.
NFT production. That disconnect that you feel that happens somewhere along the way, and along the way, the American cultural scene changed. Okay, now, what did it change to? It's changed to an unbelievable embracing of racism. It changed to Broadway is, if you do a show on Broadway, you're going to spend anywhere from $2.5 million to $5 million. Okay, if you do a musical, it's going to be $7.5 million to $15 million. They are not going to trust that kind of money with the black American. And black Americans do not invest in that amount.
That was your point in your book.
Yes.
That's why the professionals have to, and they don't know about it because they're living their professional life, but the artists have to constantly reach out. I heard Viola Davis talking about The Help, Catherine Stockett, but my question was she pushing it to black? I know that Jada Pinkett, a black professional, got Sharla Lynch's play on Angela Davis. That connection happened, but your work shows us there are infinite number of connections that need to be made between black artists and continuing petitioning to black professionals who have the money to put together a musical or a play about the life of Amy Ashwood Garvey, for example.
Well, it's more than that. I got to tell you, it's like, if I have the money to do a play on Broadway, and I do not have a star, they're not going to give me no theater, no matter what, because they can't make the 25% of the gross. Okay? If I got 2.5 or 2.7 million, if I got a cast of unknowns, if I got this play, Freight, they're not going to give me no theater. The theater's not going to become available to me. You say, why is that? Why is that disconnect? Why is that there? It's there because of a racial divide. Okay? Okay, so I've got the money. It don't mean I'm gonna get a theater. If money did not come to do what black American artists wanted during the Black Arts Movement, they thought the country would burn down. And they were burning down. The cities were going up in flames. National Guards was everywhere. And integration was, hey, you gotta kill me. If I can't get what I want. And yes, we came in and we filled that void. We had poets. We had Nikki Giovanni, Angela Davis, Haki, all these poets spouting, you know, and this was poetry without music. This was not Jay-Z. This was not Public Enemy. But this was not poetry you danced to. This was poetry you listened to. This was plays. And if you don't give me a theater, we'll do it on a street corner. So I don't know okay, in Hollywood and in New York, a young person comes out of Yale, a young person comes out of NYU, a young person comes out of Carnegie Mellon, a young person comes out of Harvard. They're not going to be talking about racism. They're not going to be talking about that divide. That happened back then. I'm going to overcome that, okay? But hey, I know I got to pay off this student loan, so I may have to. That's why I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to take my lumps, pay off my loan. But by the time they pay off their loan, they're so deep into it. It's another piece of shit, another piece of shit. All this stuff is coming out, okay? And you can't knock them. They don't want to be. They don't want to deal with that room at the top. They just want to get in there and work in there. We never wanted to be there. We always knew there's room at the top. There's no room in the middle. There's no room at the bottom. You know, it's either I'm the best and I'm the better than everybody out here. I got more knowledge than everybody out here. I've read more books. there was a time where, wow, man, I was getting these newspapers, Woody was getting these newspapers sent in. I was reading the London Times. I was reading the LA Times. Every morning. So you couldn't go in a room with 6 white people and not know everything. You had to know everything until they said, wait a minute, we can't bring him in here because he knows everything and he can prove it. We can't talk shit to him, you know? If you can see it and don't have the training to do it, I just don't know. You cannot come off the football field and become a major star. You cannot come off the basketball court and become a major star. You gotta have it inside you. You gotta have a work ethic. You gotta have a belief. You guys gotta know, most people don't even read the newspaper. So they don't know. If they can't get it online or from TV news, they don't know it. They want to know it, but take a sick person who can't read anymore. You go by their house, they don't read. They'll tell you what their story is before they got sick. Their story is before all this happened. You sit and you watch people talk on television. They don't know what they're talking about. And people say, yeah, all right, amen. That's not true. If you don't know it, early on I asked Mike, whoa, man, you got all this equipment. How long did it take? About 15 years.
That's how long?
That's
a long time.
That's a MFA.
Yep.
That's 2 PhDs.
That's right.
Okay, from doing it.
Daily.
Yeah. Okay, it's not from a professor in a white university. Let me tell you about AFI. Okay, I know you don't want to hear this, but I'll tell you about it. Okay.
I want to hear it.
Okay. In 19 65, I was 24, 25 years old. I get this job at Mobilization for Youth on the Lower East Side. Cliff Fraser's working with me. It's the beginning of a whole kind of new art, the poverty program. We get money for the theater, singing, dancing, and film making, okay? Sidney Poitier calls me. He's on the panel of this new company that's starting up, he and Gregory Peck. It's called the American Film Institute. And they are not going to take a lot of African Americans in that. So they start a film program. They want me to head it, okay? And it would start with Harry Belafonte and Third World Films in New York. But the pay was about 1/3 of what I was making running the poverty program. And I recommended Cliff Fraser and somebody else. But anyway, that's, wait a minute. They gotta be doing this for another reason. We were having kids make their own films. Have 12th and Oxford Street in Philly, Watts Project in LA, and they're gonna give me money to do films on the Lower East Side. So I had 3 films came out of that. And they just blew up the market because we had an outlet, like it is, that was on television, Gil Noble.
ABC.
ABC Gil Noble. And we did You Dig It, we did Ghetto, we did Where We Live, and these young filmmakers was popular, man. They were popular, they were everywhere. And that's why you think nobody's watching, but they're watching. And the next step, wow, man, if they don't have a BA, a BFA, they can't get in the American Film Institute, you know, because it's an MFA program, okay? So all that ties in to me. And right after that, not too long after that, Bill Duke becomes a member. He studies there. Nima Barnett studies there. Who else? It was 3 or 4 other people. He was an editor, he died.
Robertson?
Yeah. Hugh Robertson. You know, but what it was, it's like everything is connected. But you gotta have the knowledge to know it's connected. Okay? And it was so, the woman who ran it was Jean Furstenberg. So they started giving money, like $10,000. They gave me $10,000 to do Black Theater in America, towards doing it. You saw that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So AFI grant.
Okay.
But anyway, I just want to let you know there was a connection between these ghetto filmmakers, Ben Caldwell in LA, and these Charles Burnett back then made Killer of Sheep. Everything was connected. We were not disconnected, you know? And it was just interesting. It was an interesting period because the American Film Institute was not going to be usurped by these young black folks who had this eagerness.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what Mike went through, but it was like Jean Furstenberg, you had to go through her. That's when she was actually in charge.
I want to finish by saying the promise of your work, Mr. King, is producing people like Chadwick Boseman's and the Denzel Washingtons who show what you just said. There is room at the top.
Yes.
And we thank you for that service, for always showing that.
Thank you.